Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last hour of the first annual SETICon. My name is Andy Fraknoi. I'm the Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees of the SETI Institute. I teach astronomy up the road at Foothill College, and it's a great pleasure for me to introduce, as our last offering in the main room, a panel on Doomsday 2012, both the film and the concept. So we have a number of distinguished panelists with us. On my right is John Billingsley.
That number's one. We won't say who it is, but...
And we have a bunch of hecklers already on the panel. I can tell this is not good behavior late in the day. And John, as you know, played Professor West in the movie 2012. He's also portrayed Dr. Phlox on Star Trek Enterprise and has had a distinguished film and stage career. And he says he's here to make fun of the movie, so we're going to give him every chance. On his right is David Morrison, whom I've introduced before as a scientist, but this time I'm going to introduce him as a debunker, because David Morrison is a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. He's written eloquently about various topics in astronomical fiction science. He's now going to be a columnist for the Skeptical Inquirer and has been doing quite a bit of research on not just 2012, the concept, but on a larger issue, which we hope we'll talk about, called cosmophobia. And on his right, Phil Platt is known as the bad astronomer. And that's not because his research wasn't up to par. It's because he has devoted a great deal of his career, in addition to working with the Hubble Space Telescope and other accomplishments in astronomy itself, he's devoted a lot of his career to debunking bad astronomy in the movies and in the public consciousness. And he has written eloquently on blogs and in magazine articles and in his book about ways in which the sort of weird side of science gets in the way of understanding the real science. And so we're delighted to have him on the panel as well. I thought we would go down the panel and ask each panelist to make a short beginning statement, then we'll have some discussion and we'll open things up to you. So I've asked John Billingsley to start telling us about his adventures in 2012.
First of all, I would like to have a cosmophobia. Would anybody else want a cosmophobia? Let's get some cosmophobias in here. Debunkers. I'm thrilled to be on a panel with a bunch of debunkers.
It's no, never mind.
No, I think it's fabulous.
On the word bump,
was everybody here? I did a panel yesterday morning. Who was here for that? Oh, good. Then just one person. Yes. When I said I would do this panel, I told Bonnie that I would wear a sign around my neck that said "Ignoramus." And she said I should be able to turn it over and it could say wisecracker on the back. So I decided I would make a sign that said Crackeramus. And I forgot to make the sign. So that's primarily my role, is to joke about this film. I don't pretend to know or understand the science, but even as a layman, you certainly could get the idea that there was much preposterousness about it. But then Hollywood traffics in the preposterous, always has and always will. It is, after all, an entity that pitches its product at the 16-year-old mind, which is primarily interested in the bikini falling off and big explosions. So, what are you going to do? The checks didn't bounce, and let the making fun begin. I believe that gives me 3 insults to none for you gentlemen.
You're the only one who's talked so far, so give us a minute. It'll be fine.
All right. That's it.
All right.
Those are my introductory remarks.
Well, I'm certainly not here to critique the movie, and if you want to critique your own movie, that's great.
I didn't make the movie. It's not my movie. This isn't being filmed, by though it is.
No. I do, before we go on, I want to ask you the specific question that I had heard. Well, first of all, how many of you have not seen the movie 2012? Well, I presume the others have then. If you have, you will note that there's not a lot of reference to 2012 in it. That is, all of the rumors about Nibiru and galactic alignments and all that are largely absent. And so I was curious, as I had heard the rumor, that this movie was not conceived from the beginning as being about 2012.
I suspect that's true, but I wouldn't really know. I will say that the original title of the movie was Farewell Atlantis. I think a lot of people went, what the hell? And so they decided to change the title. And since 2012 is coming up and everybody knows about the prophecy, they thought, ka-ching, let's make it 2012-centric. And although, no, it isn't really trafficking heavily in the concept of 2012, it certainly is, is riffing a little bit on those ideas.
Well, and it certainly, the film used the 2012 to good advantage in its trailers, because they ended by saying, Google search 2012 for the truth.
Right.
And think of all those thousands of web pages out there that in effect became part of the marketing for the film.
I'll say this also, I survived, so if there's ever a 2013, I could be in it.
Right. Well, I'm all for joking about the film, but I'm not entirely prepared to joke about the 2012 Doomsday, because I answer questions that are sent to me to the NASA website for astrobiology to ask an astrobiologist. And for the last couple of years, I've been getting an average of about 5 questions a day, which is not very much. And some of them are gross misconceptions. The ones that worry me are those from people who are genuinely frightened that the world will end, a concept that I find a hard time getting my hand around. But at least one question a week comes from a teenager who is considering or threatening suicide, so they don't have to live through this cataclysm. I've had just a handful of questions comments from women who have said they plan to kill their children and themselves. There are, of course, other people taking more benign acts like selling all their property in order to build a backyard bomb shelter. I think the most touching one I got, I don't, of course, know who it's from. Some of you may not realize that when you do write to NASA, we do not keep a record of who you are, unlike every time you run your Visa card through a charge, where that's going into untold numbers of databases. The government doesn't do that. So I don't know much about the people that write, but this person wrote a very short, eloquent message and said, I'm so scared. My only friend is my little dog, Wheezy, and I want you to tell me when I should put her to sleep so she won't suffer during the cataclysm. And we'll come back to this, and I hope I'll have time to talk a little bit about the spectrum of weird ideas that have been layered onto 2012. And the number of things that people are afraid of. It's not just the Mayan prophecy, it's not just the so-called galactic alignment, which doesn't really happen, but if it did, it was 10 years ago. It's not Planet Nibiru, which Phil wrote so eloquently about as Planet X the last time it came around in 2003. It's a whole panoply of fear that are associated with this. Many people look at the Mayan prophecy, and I don't mean the real Mayan prophecy, I mean the way it's been marketed, and think, well, it must be true, and therefore. And so a lot of questions like this, when the cataclysm occurs in 2012, will it be so-and-so? Will it be a black hole? Will it be the sun explode? The assumption is that there will be such a cataclysm, and then people look around for what to be afraid of. So I think at some level it's a serious problem. I have no way of knowing what fraction of people are worried. I know that when I talk to teachers, 100% of them say that it's an issue in their classrooms. And I know when I talk to my fellow scientists, I'm very lucky if even one of them has ever heard of it. I've heard of the movie, but anything else. I was in a trip in Asia a month ago with 16 retired scientists, so they may be a little gray or something. And I asked them, and not one of the 16 had ever heard of Doomsday 2012. So it is I presume you folks wouldn't be here if you hadn't heard of it. But there really are those who are deeply involved, who are surfing the net, who are reading some of the 350 books on Amazon.com about 2012. And then there's another very large group of people that has simply never heard of it and probably will ignore it all along for the nonsense it is.
Well, I assume that your story tells us more about how socially inept and removed from society scientists are than anything else. And as far as me eloquently writing about Planet X, basically by the end, it was just me grumbling and swearing and doing whatever ASCII translation of this is. I was pretty tired of it by then. I want to assure you that this gap between David and me and John over there is unintentional. It's that's
Ghettoization, ghettoization.
yeah, that's right. He was in that movie, you know.
There's one.
I did watch that movie. I think I'm still watching that movie. It was so long.
There's two.
The original title, I believe, was John Cusack barely escaping from a giant hole in the ground.
There's three.
There you go. Now we're tied.
Now you're
We're
tied.
tied. Okay.
Now you're on a
Okay,
roll.
I've got more. Saying by the end, I was wishing it was 2012 and the Earth would be destroyed. It was. That's right. Yeah.
There's one for you. 4 to 3 to 1.
Actually, I have to say, I thought you were terrific in the movie.
I'm going to take one off.
Yeah,
Wow.
there you
3 to 3 to 1.
And just to butter you up a little bit more, the movie, and I'm suddenly not remembering the title, where you're in a cabin with other people discussing a man who is claiming that he's...
Oh, yes, based on a Jerome Bixby
Yes.
script. A Man from Earth.
Man from Earth, thank you very much. I could not remember. I just happened to watch that one the other day. That was an excellent movie.
I like that movie.
Yeah,
as
if
well.
you all should watch that, look that up on IMDb, Man from Earth with John in it.
The opposite end of the spectrum, whereas the 2012 was made for $175 million,
Yeah.
Man from Earth was made for $175.
And yet is a far superior movie, so there you go. So y'all have heard about 2012. I've been hearing about this. I remember vaguely when I first heard about it. It was many, many years ago. This kind of stuff pops up on my radar usually several years before other people's, because somebody emails me and says, hey, did you hear about this? And sometimes it's like, yeah, I hear about all kinds of wacky stories, and I can usually tell. It's sort of that little gut feeling, that hunch, that voice of experience that says, yeah, this one doesn't have legs. This isn't going anywhere, and that happens. And then the other ones where it was like, my first thought is, because it's like I know what I'm going to be doing for the next 5 years, and I've actually, David and I were talking about this. I have not tackled 2012 very much, just very obliquely on the blog, on my Bad Astronomy blog. Mostly because it's huge. It got so big so fast, faster than I expected, that I haven't really sunk my teeth into it. By the time I wanted to, there was already the 2012hoax.com, is that right? 2012hoax.org, that is being run by this man here, and who's Bill. See, I'm close. I got the B. Man, I'm better. I'm so terrible with names. Who is doing that? That's a fantastic page with debunking. 2012hoax.org. A few of you have heard of it. And universetoday.com. Universetoday.com is sort of a stepsister site of mine. Fraser Kane, who runs that, and I've been friends for many years. He has several people writing for him, and one of them has a series of 2012 articles. So if you go to universetoday.com, you'll see on the sidebar a whole bunch of categories. One of them is 2012. If you click that, you'll find, I'm not even sure how many articles at this point, well over a dozen, basically stepping on the throat of this conspiracy. Not that I think that's going to help. 2012 as a conspiracy theory, as a doomsday idea. Well, it's a doomsday idea first, a conspiracy theory second. I'm part of the conspiracy theory because I'm telling you it's all baloney, and I'm only using the word baloney because I see kids in the audience. Oh, sorry, Joe. It's okay. Oh, she doesn't like bologna. She's a vegetarian. I shouldn't use that word either. Okay. It's a doomsday idea first, and these come and go. They've been around a long time, and I mean thousands of years, but a lot of people don't know that in modern times there have been dozens of these. And, you know, in your lifetime, there isn't a person here, well, there are a couple of people here, I guess, now that I look, and I see some kids who are under 10. But one of the big modern ones was on May 5th, 2000, the alignment of the planets was going to rip the Earth apart. Does anybody remember this? A few of you do? That was ridiculous. I'm not going to go into details about that. The next one was 2003, as David alluded to, was Planet X, Nibiru, which was going to pass by the Earth and rip us all to pieces. And that became big on the web. And there was a woman, Nancy Leader, who has her Zeta Talk website, and she would go on the radio, and she was getting a lot of mainstream press, although they would basically making fun of her. But she got a lot of press on the conspiracy radio shows saying that this planet was going to kill us. And she knew this because aliens from Zeta Reticulum were telepathically communicating with her about a giant planet on a 3,600-year orbit that we didn't know about that sweeps by the Earth and wipes out 90% of the people. And every single thing I just said there that had a verb in it was wrong. I mean, it's just provably silly. But the web was filled with people who had pictures of this. And it turns out these pictures were faked. They were misinterpreted. They were reflections inside their camera, lens flares. And I would say, that's a lens flare. And after a while, Nancy would start saying, don't tell me it's a lens flare. I know it's a lens flare. It's like, clearly you don't, because that's a lens flare. And we would see this a lot. And people, I could easily just sit here and talk for the next 45 minutes about this, but I won't. but people want to believe in this stuff. These come and go, people forget, they come back up, they get recycled, and the next thing you know, Planet X, I totally basically stopped that one in 2003, and it's back. It's being woven back into the 2012 scenario. This stuff will always be with us. The best thing we can hope to do is talk about it, show why it's wrong, and hopefully keep the damage these things do to a minimum. Because as you know, it's fun to make movies about it, it's fun to laugh about it, but as David said, there's a hard edge to this that we have to be aware of.
Well, at the risk of venturing into uncomfortable territory, the ultimate doomsday scenario is the rapture.
Absolutely.
We are a credulous people, and we always will be a credulous people. We are always going to be searching for fantasy, and we're always going to be, and I don't mean to be casting aspersions on organized religion, but let's face it, myth and legend is what we have clung to from the time we crawled out of the ocean. So, what's the difference finally between, ninja assassins killed JFK, between, yada, 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 yada. It must be hard to be professional debunkers because, you'll be debunking till the end of time.
Actually, it's easy because we'll be debunking till the end of time.
That's true.
Well, everything you say is true, and it's important. But I look at this as a scientist, and I see people misusing science. If they just told me it was the equivalent to the rapture and that Jesus was going to come back in December 2012 and so forth, that is a legitimate religious belief I don't happen to share, but it's there. But when they start making up ideas about the universe that are total nonsense, such as an alignment.
The creationists certainly, it could be argued, do the same thing. I mean, they
could.
bring science.
I worry about them too.
Oh, we deal with them all the time too.
But let me just say that some of the things that seem self-evident that are, quote, science are so wrong, and I keep trying to figure out how to turn this into a learning moment. The people who think an alignment must be dangerous. That when two planets are in a row, there must be some force focused on it. When the sun passes roughly in the direction of the galactic center, that the giant black hole in the galactic center is sending out rays, and the sun will bend those rays, and they will come to Earth and incinerate our planet. There are a lot of things like that people assert as fact, and I don't know how to argue against them. Maybe ridicule is the right thing, but they represent a real misunderstanding of the natural world by the people who are afraid. And the same thing could be said in a different way, for their faith in prophecy. Now, we could argue about what the Mayans did or didn't prophesy, but I really scrounge up when people say, but the Mayans were much better astronomers than we are now. And they had these precise measurements, and of course we have to take them seriously.
Yeah.
So can we just for the sake of making sure that we're on the record, talk a tiny bit about what the 2012 issues are. So I wanted to hear a little bit about the science, and then we can go on and take the discussion from there.
I guess I figured most people here had been exposed to some of these things.
So Roland Emmerich had a script idea. Oh wait, no.
No.
Is that
No, the 2012 thing comes from first Nancy Leader. What Phil didn't really say, but it's true, is as soon as as Nehru didn't show up in 2003, she pushed reset on her website and started talking about 2012. There is the fact that it is a significant point in the Mayan calendar in which the long count, and the Mayan calendar, as you probably all know, does not use days and months and weeks like ours, but it's a continuous counting. You count numbers of days in various cycles. One of those cycles ends in 2012. Some people think that's a cataclysm. I assume it's just like the fact that my desk calendar ends on December 31st. The next day is, just the first year of the next cycle. And then there are these strange stories that the sun is going to be aligned with the center of the galaxy and focus the bad rays from the black hole. And there are all sorts of alignment things that go with it. And there is now, sort of layered on top of this, a fear of the sun. I should pull out just today's messages and tell you. One guy said, but you know that the solar storm in 2012 is going to be 20 times larger than any other solar storm in history. No, I don't know that. There's another cult of fear of the sun that's coming in, that this is going to be the worst. People write to me and say, when the solar storm hits, my husband says that there will be floods and windstorms and a change in the axis of the earth, and we'll all be killed.
Oh, I'm agreeing that people say that. I'm not agreeing that that's going to happen. Yeah, I've read that as well. Gosh, it must be true. There's the Mayan calendar thing kind of makes me laugh because the Mayans were good astronomers. When you're an agricultural society, you're tied to the seasons, you're tied to the stars. As all the old cultures were, Mayans were more contemporary than the Sumerians and the Babylonians. But people say they had, when you say they could predict something that was going to happen this far in the future, and a lot of the times people are saying it's some sort of mystical thing, it's some sort of psychic thing. And I think, well, if they predicted that, why didn't they predict the collapse of their own civilization? The Mayans are still around, there's still lots of Mayan people around, and that's fine. Oh, there are? Okay, great, yeah, that's fantastic. But their the culture that we're talking about, of the quote-unquote ancient Mayans, that collapsed, and they couldn't predict that. So clearly that can't be right. And also, if you talk to Mayan scholars, it turns out that the way the Mayans viewed the skies and everything was actually quite a bit different than the way we do now. And even the way anybody looks at the sky, they just interpreted it differently, almost more poetically. And so I wouldn't exactly base any future cataclysm on that. The galactic center thing, I researched this. This cracks me up. The galaxy is basically a big disk, right? And so we are in that disk. So there is a direction you can look to see the center of the galaxy, just like if you live in New York City, there's a direction you can look to see downtown. And that direction happens to be in the constellation of Sagittarius. And the sun passes through Sagittarius every December. And because the Earth is, the axis of the Earth changes year by year, the path of the sun every year changes just a little bit. And it's swinging, from your point of view, it's swinging sort of near the galactic center, the nearer, the nearer, the nearer. And what a lot of these guys are saying is it's going to pass over the galactic center on December 21st, 2012. Wrong. It actually got closest in 1998. And when I researched that,
world end then?
Yeah, and I as many of you may recall, that was the day the Earth did not end. And so I missed it. I was, brushing my teeth that day, so I missed it. But the funny thing is, then, if you dig deep enough to see that, then there's the answer that, oh no, there's actually sort of a doomsday season. There's this era of 2012, and then it gets all into the stuff. And so they want to tie this to science because it makes them sound legitimate. But if you try to pin them down on the science, they're a watermelon seed, and the tighter you squeeze, the farther they shoot. And so so there's that galactic thing, right? And the solar storm thing kills me as well because first of all, we cannot predict what the sun is going to be like on any given day, any more than I can say on October 4th. In Virginia, there's going to be a hurricane. I can say that there will be hurricanes that year, but not necessarily when. And the sun is the same way. We know that there's this 11-year cycle. We know it's ramping up to a peak. And they've been claiming for years the peak would be in 2012, and it turns out, no, it's not. And now we are almost positive it won't be because of this very long minimum period we've had. That generally means the sun is going to take longer to ramp up, so chances are the peak's going to be in 2013 or 2014. And not only that, but the worst flares, the worst solar events tend to happen on the flip side of the cycle. So it'll probably be 2014, 2015 before we see lots of massive flares. 2003 was some of the worst solar storms we have ever seen since 1859, when it was first discovered that the sun was active. And even in 1859, where we did have the most active sun ever recorded, again, you may note that the Earth was not destroyed.
But I heard that all of our satellites in 1859 were burned out.
Well, that's true. By 1860, there was not a single satellite on Earth.
So let me turn the discussion, but I'm going to ask for audience participation in a second. But let me turn the discussion to the more general question here for a second. So what I'm hearing you all say is that although there are specific things that may happen in 2012, as Dave has written, there seems to be an increase in this fear of the skies. And I wonder if that's connected with our times. Are we living in more nervous times? Are people more uncertain?
Is it movies? Is it movies like 2012?
I don't think that's true, though. I really don't. And I will only, go back to something I started to say that to me is sort of the point, is that man is man. We have always been credulous. We have always been, we've gone ape shit about all sorts of stupid theories down the years, and we always will. And if there had been somebody sitting next to you right now that was a believer, it would be like what a dog hears. Blah, 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 solar flares. That's the way we are. From the time man started to walk, he looks up and says, holy shit, gods are up there, and the world's going to come to an end. I think the bigger question is, one, what issues can we address? One is we don't spend enough money in education. Two, we have a media that promotes fear. If it bleeds, it leads. And there have been some wonderful books written about this penchant we have to always try and make a buck by insisting to people that they should be scared shitless about things they shouldn't be scared about. Honestly, forgive me and then I'll shut up, but, all the time and energy I can't bring my toothpaste on the plane anymore. I'll take my chances. I'm more likely to die driving on my road than I'm likely to be blown out of the sky by a guy who's made a toothpaste bomb. We live in a society where not only are we scared of everything, but we feel that we have to fix everything. And I think the only reason it gets exacerbated is because there are more of us. So there are more theories, and there's more talk, and there's more blah, 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 blah. When there were fewer of us, and we lived on farms, and we lived in a more bucolic world, well, you might not hear the lunatic theory for a couple of weeks until you met around with Cracker Barrel. Now you've got 50,000 of them on the internet right there arriving at your breakfast table.
That's a legitimate point. There's a doomsday cult you may have never heard of, actually, called the Millerites. In the 19th century, they claimed, I believe it was a comet. There was a great comet that was going to come and destroy the Earth, and they were going to do this, and it didn't come. And they said, oh, did we say 1872? We meant 1874 is when the Earth's going to come to an end, or some date like that. This happened over and over again, and this actually this became the Seventh-day Adventists, which is a religion you've heard of. And most people have no idea that this started with a wacky doomsday cult. So this has been with us forever. It's just that, as John says, with the internet, I remember when the internet came out, I thought, this is great. This is going to be a knowledge base. It's going to be so much easier to show people stuff. For about 4 cycles of my computer CPU, I thought that. I thought, yeah, this is going to spread it so much faster. It's going to be a fire hose of misinformation. And that's exactly what it's been. So now it's even easier to fleece the sheep, as it were.
Well, sure, obviously you're right, but the good stuff is on the internet.
Yes.
And so is the bad stuff. And if there's any message that I have written more often than don't worry about 2012, it's don't believe everything on the internet. There's no log and slying on the internet. I'd like to know what you think. I think the majority of stuff on the internet is completely wrong.
The majority? The majority is pornography.
You're right.
And we're not getting into that. There are children present. So let me open things up now from the audience. If at all possible, try to make your remarks relatively short so we get a lot of different points of view in. But if you're concerned, if you have a question, we'd love to hear from you. We'll start over there.
Better yet, if you have a solution.
Well, I have a question. I have a question regarding the science of the movie. Yeah. Neutrinos. So how likely is it?
It was a movie.
It was a movie.
It's not a movie. It's like a fish.
No, the science of the
It is a movie.
I'm quoting the science of the movie.
It wasn't neutrinos, it was super neutrinos. So you really have
My
to be
bad.
careful with that.
My bad. No, but maybe the science of the panel.
Other than that, your question's correct.
Thank you. So if there was a super huge concentration of neutrinos, if it blasted the Earth, could it melt the core? No. Thank you.
No. No, in fact, neutrinos are one of the least interacting particles there are. You've probably heard they can pass through 8 light years of lead or some nonsense thing like that. In fact, a friend of mine did a calculation that the brightest source of neutrinos in the universe are supernovae. When the core of a star collapses and the outer parts blow up, a vast amount of neutrinos are released. Most of the energy of a supernova is in neutrinos. And it's basically the sun's lifetime energy output in 1 second is put out by these neutrinos. And 10 billion years of solar lifetime compressed into 1 second. That's what we're talking about here. If a supernova were to go off where the sun is right now, and where we are at 90 million miles from the sun, you would receive a lethal dose of neutrino absorption. Okay, but if you were even 10 times farther away, it would suck, to be a medical term, but it wouldn't kill you. And so,
Well, the sun would kill you.
yeah,
It went
the
supernova.
sun can't go supernova. So the point is, you have to be extremely close to an unbelievable source of neutrinos to even do any damage at all. So this idea that the sun can produce that many neutrinos, or that there's any source in the universe that could do that and actually have it affect the Earth, is well, it's Hollywood science.
All right, other
Quite a
thoughts? Over here.
What are, like, you said solar flares go through the cycles, and then you said probably later, 2014, 15. What can we expect by higher activities or something? I know it would be bad if we were out in space.
If you buy my book, I
Yeah.
mean, no.
We have an 11-year cycle, and some people think that this next cycle's maximum is going to be lower because we had this extended minimum. Only the sun knows. We can't predict solar weather any better than we can predict the specifics of Earth weather. But it did pretty much the same thing, probably more, in 2001 or 2000. Also in 1990. Were you on Earth then?
Yeah.
I remember seeing you.
Did it hurt you?
Oh, you did. I was like this big. I don't know.
Well, okay. All right, you win that one.
But
It's something that just has happened every 11 years throughout history.
You should have seen him before the solar flares.
Yeah, that's
bro.
right.
He was a good-looking guy back
I
then.
had this weird twitch.
All right.
But honestly, the only thing it can do is it can hurt our satellites for sure. We've had satellites that have been lost due to solar activity. Some of them shut down because they're getting flooded with subatomic particles, or they get hit by high energy light like gamma rays. That can do damage to them. Here on Earth, there's not much they can do except blow out our power grid. And a very large solar event couples with the Earth's magnetic field, which creates a big current in the Earth. We here in North America are more susceptible to that than almost any place else in the world because of the geology of our region, and that can cause power outages. It did in Quebec in 1989, and if you live in Quebec and it's March, the last thing you want to be is without power for 5 days. So that was bad. So yes, a solar event can kill people, maybe even on a large scale if it were a huge event, but the more likely danger is how it could flatten out our economy if it blows out all of our satellites on which our internet rests, our banking rests, and all of that sort of thing.
But I mean, to be fair, many of those satellites are shielded, right? You're making it sound
Up
like
to a
you're-
point.
Yeah.
Up to a point.
Yeah, well, clearly, and the same thing's true for the electric grid. It's a known problem, and you try to isolate pieces of the grid so if one goes down, it doesn't carry out through the whole country. And satellites, typical thing there, you do actually have a little warning of a solar event, is the satellite turns itself off, it goes into safe mode. So the real danger, the thing you should really be afraid of, is you might lose your cable TV channels for a day.
Might not be able to watch 2020.
You can see why Hollywood doesn't want to make a movie about that. Though. It's like,
Yes.
All right, so what should the response from the amateur astronomy community be for all this? Because, you know, we've talked about new media, we've talked about the internet, and, you know, I wouldn't even be in for this if it wasn't for the kids in the classroom that I've talked to. So, what do you think that the amateur community should be doing for this?
Talking about it, doing what you're doing. You have a great website, and, you know, promote it. Let people know about what's going on.
2012hoax.org.
.org. There you go. And honestly, we talked about this earlier today too. You know, what can people do? It's just talk to people. If you're a teacher, absolutely bring this up in your class. I actually was visiting a college recently and was giving a talk, and one of the students asked about it, and we talked about it for a while. And the teacher came up to me later and apologized and said, I had no idea that they were going to ask questions about this. And I said, are you kidding? I always get questions about this. Of course they're going to. The fact that the teacher didn't know and was embarrassed by it was what bugged me, is that he should have known about it. They should have talked to him about it in the past. The more information that gets out there, you know, the more light we shine on this, the less likely it is to survive.
A more troublesome question that I have seen is parents write to me and say their teacher told the student that there was going to be, the world was going to end, or at least there was going to be a cataclysm in 2012. What the hell does the parent do that faces that?
Although in fairness, I used to go home and tell my parents that my teachers told me shit they didn't tell me. Mr. Grundy said that I didn't have to do my homework on Thursdays.
Maybe this is a plot to get an unliked teacher dismissed.
Kids are smart.
But on a more serious note, how many teachers are trained in dealing with such subjects in their graduate and teacher school training? This is an uncharted territory for everybody.
I get email from kids saying my teacher said the moon landings were fake.
Yeah.
I get that
I mean,
as well.
there's a lot of opportunities here for people who are knowledgeable, like you guys, to help teachers. You don't need to make fun of them, you don't need to be hostile about it, but there's a lot of information out there that teachers just simply don't have. Especially teachers. No, hold on. Especially teachers who are not trained in the sciences in the lower grades, would have to cover every subject. So you can do a good deed by bringing reliable information from your website, from some of the resources that are available from reputable sources, to a teacher, to a library. Those are really good things you can contribute. Over here.
Yeah, I was wondering, I know the whole tide of misinformation is not going to stop, as you said, but I was wondering about the particular people that write and are terrified. If you get a sense that you are helping them or reaching them and convincing them not to be afraid, and if so, is there a particular tactic that works better?
I don't know. I think sometimes you just have to tailor it to the individual. If I have a kid, and this has happened actually, kids who email me and say something versus an adult, the approach is different. I mean, there's no one answer to how you teach somebody something or how you reason somebody out of a situation that they didn't reason themselves into. You just have to play it by ear, and it's hard. After a while, you get experience at it, but it's tough. I don't have an answer for you, to be honest. Maybe Dave does.
Well, you know, mine is mostly posted, and of course, Hudson's website is out there as a website, not a Q&A with people. And I'm happy to say I've gotten some really wonderful letters from people thanking me for doing that. But when a specific child writes and threatens suicide, I mean, I don't know what to do about that.
I think you also have to have some kind of historical context. I mean, we are witnessing, for instance, something right now that I think in a relatively short period of time is kind of remarkable, and that is the extent to which the population is accepting gay relationships. When you go back, my dad is gay, and in a pre-Stonewall era, you could not be openly gay. The idea that in, 40 years, we are now able to talk of gay marriage, to a certain extent, it's about you can't get discouraged about the folks who will not listen. You can't get, and this is as much about a political, I think, as a scientific question. When you face folks who say, don't buy it, you simply continue on. You talk to everybody. You talk to the folks who will listen, and slowly the culture changes. Slowly the culture changes. Slowly, you know. I mean, I think that probably 2012, because the movie came out, might have popped some of these lunatic theories, but I don't think these lunatic theories will be with us for another 10 years. We'll be on to something else, of course.
Well, I want to tell you that I think the movie helped. me and what I'm doing. One of the quickest ways to put down a suggestion is say, oh, that's just Hollywood.
I've been doing it my whole life.
All right, other thoughts from the audience in the back?
Just a brief story. When I was at NASA Ames covering the L-Cross, when they rammed that into the moon, and public affairs got a phone call from a woman asking if the world would end when they did this. And he said no. And she asked, can I call you back in the morning to find out? He said, well, if the world ends, I'm not going to be here to take the phone. It's a true story.
It's awfully tempting to offer to people to say, I'll buy your house for a penny on the dollar that you spent on it. And I used to joke that the Planet X stuff in 2003 was all just an attempt to buy up expensive housing in California and Florida, because all these people were saying, sell your coastal homes. Like, well, what homes are most expensive in this country? Yeah, so it was a real estate scam. People don't have a sense of scale. It has to do with our education, it has to do with our science education, all of that. But it's all tied in fact, as well with the fact that we have a miserable sense of scale. You can't take a spacecraft that weighs less than a ton and slam it into an object that is 2,100 miles across and change it in any way that you'll notice. You're just not going to push it around or do anything like that. But people don't understand that. They don't understand how the black hole in the center of our galaxy, people talk about that and they think, wow, it's a black hole. It must be, it's something really powerful. But it's really only it's a 4 million solar mass black hole, 4 million times the mass of the sun. That sounds huge until you realize there are 400 billion stars in the galaxy. So this thing is really a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the mass of the whole galaxy. So even though the sun may align with it every year, it's 26 quadrillion miles away. That's a long walk, pack a lunch. If you were to remove that black hole, you would not even notice it in our galaxy. It would be like a flake of dust coming off of your skin. It's a tiny fraction of the total mass of the galaxy. So there's no way this thing can affect us. But when you're talking about black holes and the sun's aligning with it, yeah, you're going to scare people. So that's part of the problem. They just misunderstand the science and the scale of all this.
Especially when you use your black hole voice.
That's true. I'm sorry. Did I frighten anyone?
So let me still take you back one step. Back in the 1950s, when people were really worried about the communist scare and the threat of Russia somehow overtaking us, that got translated into a lot of Hollywood movies about the alien takeover, right? And we often saw that that was a way of dealing with fears on Earth in an extraterrestrial sense. Could we be seeing something like that now, in the sense that there's a lot of fear that we don't have control over our environment, that this whole financial structure, financial disaster happened to us without a sense of control? And this is a way of translating that into fiction, into an extraterrestrial realm.
Well, if they're right, we certainly don't have to worry about the financial crisis.
I think there's also something to be said for, if the world is coming to an end, I don't have to take responsibility for my life. I don't have to take responsibility for my country. I don't have to take responsibility for the politics of our country. I don't have to take responsibility. I mean, it's comforting. It's one of the reasons that people believe in myth, It's like, let this cup from me pass, not my job.
You mean there's some motive when students write and say, I can't do my homework because I'm worried about the end of the world?
I never tried that one.
It's better than my dog ate my homework.
That's good.
Terry.
Yeah, I wonder if you could address a fear that I've heard a lot, and I know the answer, but I want you to address it. At CERN on the Swiss border with Switzerland, France and Switzerland, there's this super accelerator that's revving up now, higher and higher energy. And will it make a black hole that will start eating things and get so big that it starts to eat the entire Earth?
Exciting.
I heard a lot of worry about that.
Well, you know the answer too, that the kind of energies and the kind of interactions it does are achieved by cosmic rays quite naturally. And so they're happening all the time. And if that was going to produce a black hole and destroy the Earth, it would have happened several billion years ago, naturally.
And no, it won't. So there's that as well. I apologize. I have to go. My flight's in an hour and a half, and I have to catch a ride to the airport. Thank you all for coming here. It's been a terrific experience for me. I'm really glad you all came and made this a successful conference. And as I leave, I'd like to thank John and David and Andy for participating in this panel. This is an important topic. Whether we make fun of it or not, as we're discussing, this is an important topic, and it leads to other important topics about our feelings of belief, as John has very eloquently said earlier, why we believe things, how we believe things, and this one specific topic of 2012 is under this umbrella of belief and doomsday scenarios. And I really hope that if any of you have an answer to how we can basically drown this stuff in the bathtub, I would love to hear it. So, but you can find me on the web. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear a little more about 2012 Hoax, because I think that is the best website to go to, because it's well organized. There's a lot of other information out there, but you can go there and list topics and look at each one. I'm going to give you this for just a moment to tell us about it.
All right, my name is Bill, and I am not an astronomy expert. I'm an amateur. As part of my love of amateur astronomy, I went into schools and have been doing that for about 4 or 5 years. And about 4 years ago, I started getting these 2012 questions, and of course, I just dismissed them. But they kept coming back, and they kept getting stronger and stronger. So I started the website with a few friends of mine, and it's basically just taken off from there. I write about, I'd say, a little bit less than half of the materials from me, the rest of the materials from a group of about 20 collaborators. And we try and chase down, tackle, beat to death every single 2012 rumor we can find, and post the results. So that's basically what the genesis of the website is. And along the way, I've had the good fortune of meeting many very generous scientists who step forward with the expert opinions that we need in order to debunk these things. So, like I said before, I wouldn't be in this if it wasn't for the kids. Because they're the ones who, 5th graders, coming up to me and asking me if the world was going to end, if they were going to die. And actually, that happened to me in 3rd grade presentation I did as well, which just blew me away. So, where this is strongest, unfortunately, I think, is the schools. The kids are hearing this from other kids in the schools, that the world is going to end, and the grown-ups are not telling us because they don't want us to be afraid. And when you think about it, that's a very powerful message for a kid to hear from another kid. So,
Thank you very much. And Dave, you've talked about this, but it's also the growth and the change in the cable channel presentations. Can you say a word or two about some of your experience with the cable channel?
Yeah, well, we live in a country that elevates laissez-faire capitalism above truth. And so if a television channel can sell more advertising by telling untruths, they will. And we've seen this hit. It started, initially I could say to people, hey, this is all just an internet rumor. Then there started being things about it on the History Channel, and they brought in Nostradamus and the I Ching and all sorts of things. And then it shifted over to the Discovery Channel, and a couple of months ago, for the first time, National Geographic, who discuss these things as if they were legitimate. They may not have outright said the world's going to end in 2012, but they've given it that sort of serious airing, and that's the world we live in.
That's very eloquently put, and I think you're absolutely right. It is a function of laissez-faire capitalism, which is essentially talking about scale. I mean, scale is also, we live in a world in which, unfortunately, it's about me. Me, me, me. And if I can make a buck, and if I have to lie to do it, I'll do it. And we have, unfortunately, elevated those values, I think, in our culture and our society above more humanistic values. I mean, talk about what's the answer. I mean, some of that answer is simply spiritual, not in a religious sense, but in a value-based sense. If our values don't change, if we can't find a way to care more about the society we live in than our individual selfishness, then these are the kinds of things we live with.
And the problem immediately for us is when you're again trying to talk to kids or others, you used to say, well, you can always believe Nova, or you can always believe the National Geographic. And that's not true anymore. And so it's, there are fewer stakes in the ground that you can always turn to and trust.
Yeah, and I should add that it isn't just the 3rd and 5th graders in my college classes. I get the same level of concern, and they often say, but I saw it on Discovery Channel, I saw it on the History Channel, there must be something to it, which, we know may not be true, but that's certainly part still of the reputation of these channels in our culture. Another point from the audience.
Yeah, I was just wondering if maybe there was some way to identify a responsibility for these, doing this on an ongoing basis. I mean, why doesn't the National Academy have some rapid response team that can actually, respond to these kinds of things with some sense of authority instead of relying on amateurs and teachers to kind of do the dirty work? It shouldn't be an ad hoc situation. It should be an organized situation. So when these things come up, there's a response and it has a voice behind it.
I think that's a really good question. I can answer it in a slightly different mode. I've had a number of people write to me saying, why don't you get President Obama to address the nation and say that this is a hoax? And, you laugh because that would elevate it to an importance far beyond what it has. But maybe there is a point at which hoaxes become so prominent that the National Academy or somebody should say something.
Well, for Y2K, I think there was some talk at the executive level about that, reassuring the country.
I didn't know that.
I think I recall that.
But to the extent we live in a country now where the level of partisanship is so strong, there's no such thing, and I think this is what you were just saying, there's no such thing as an institution that isn't going to be immediately viewed with suspicion by sheer dint of the fact they weigh in. There are
tens of millions of people that if President Obama said this would immediately assume that it is a conspiracy.
Exactly. 40% of the people in a particular political party believe in the birther theory, for God's sake, that he wasn't even born in this country. It's an unfortunate, and I don't mean to get political, I just think there's so many instances and so many examples of this kind of, I'm going to plug my ears and believe what I want to believe. That and on a certain level, I think we also have to accept the fact, thus it has always been, and thus it will always be. But because we live in a much larger society with many more voices, and the megaphones are bigger, it can be perceived, perhaps, as a fundamental change in human nature. I don't know. I go back and forth on that, between being an alarmist and sort of saying, human condition.
I certainly agree with what you're saying, but there's a part of me that still says, why would anyone want the world to end in 2 years? What's the appeal of that?
There's a certain titillation of fear, I think is what I've heard you guys say. Let me just answer to the point that you're making. It's not the National Academy, but there is an organization which on a non-ad hoc basis does respond to most such claims. It used to be called SETICon, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. It's now called the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, CSI. And if you Google them, it is a group, David and I both are fellows of the organization. It's a group of scientists, educators, magicians, because they're good at looking at hoaxes, lawyers, doctors, others, who have taken it upon themselves to try to educate the public about these elements of fiction science. We talked about it on the Bad Astronomy panel a few panels ago. And they are an excellent source of sort of reasoned inquiry. They have a magazine called The Skeptical Inquirer, which you can find in larger libraries. And I think they're a wonderful place to go if you are uncertain about certain claims, whether it's vitamin claims or end of the world claims. They are very good as a reliable resource.
But they aren't helping us talk to fifth graders. I mean,
well,
it's a very small audience.
Yeah, they talk mostly to the converted, that's true. All right, other thoughts from the audience? Issues? Yes?
recently I attended a talk with David Morrison, and I sent out a link to some of my friends for the Ask an Astrobiologist website saying, you know, if you're concerned about 2012, here's where to go. And I get a random response from some person I've never heard of who basically calls me naive and says NASA's lying. And they're keeping the truth from us. And I'm sitting here staring at my computer thinking, now how do you respond to that? When you have, you know, the conspiracy theorist I've never heard of saying, well, you're a complete quack too. It's, you know, how do you respond to that kind of person? You know, it's not the third grader, it's not the fifth grader, you know, there's no reasoning there.
You don't. You don't. If they truly, the people that really buy into conspiracy theories are not going to believe anything I say.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a place where, how do we behave in our own life? You know, we have a limited amount of time on this planet, and we want to associate with people we don't think are loons. You know? I mean, that's the bottom line, is you self-select.
Let's see, in the back.
I think part of the reason why people are vulnerable to lateral theories is that they don't have faith that the system can deal with things like global climate change or economic decline in the Western civilization. They don't have faith that we can deal with the threat of accidental nuclear war or semi-accidental nuclear war. And also, if you're as old as I am, you've been around long enough to know that the news media does not give you the truth about certain stories that happened in history, recent history, ancient history. Some cover-ups do work, and the news media will not straighten these things out. For instance, in the case of semi-accidental nuclear war, most people are pretty complacent these days since the end of the Cold War. I've been complacent myself. Lately, I've gotten more worried about this possibility. I've spoken with my congressman twice about improving the control over nuclear weapons in the US, Russia, and China. Not disarmament. It doesn't matter if we reduce the operation of weapons from 7,000 to 3,000. What matters is improving control over the activation of the weapons. Currently, the political leader can activate, in each of the three countries, can activate nuclear weapons without the consent of Congress or the Duma or the Central Committee. And if the military authorities lose contact with the political leadership, at least in the US and Russia, the military leadership can activate nuclear weapons.
So we're coming down pretty much to the end. Do you want to summarize your point?
So what I advocate, what I've talked with the congressman about twice, and he's given me some encouragement, is that we should negotiate with China first, and internally, of course. There should be someone in the Congress, for instance, there should be someone in the Congress, perhaps a couple of members of the House and Senate, or a conference committee, that can veto first use of nuclear weapons by the president. Now, you don't know who will be president after 2012.
I think we're getting a little bit off the topic of this panel, but I appreciate your comments.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I don't know if we're into concluding statements, and I'm happy to hear more discussion. But astronomy is fun. Science is fun. When I was a kid, I was delighted to read about new discoveries in astronomy. A lot of us here are amateur astronomers are involved. It's a great thing. Let's not let the negative doomsday people overcome that. Let's not succumb to cosmophobia. Let's tell the world that the universe is not against us.
So, any other? I saw a couple more hands, and then I think we can conclude. Yes.
The question I have is along the same lines of the cosmophobia. California will sink during a major earthquake. That there's a superbug that will wipe us all out. The concept for this idea is because I'm also a classroom teacher, and I don't teach the 2012 is the end of the world. I just say it's where you'll have your final exam. The idea is more of, we've never seen a meteor. Earthquakes don't come that often enough to cause severe damage to us. We see it outside of our world. So in the classroom, in 3rd grade, 5th grade, you can take them the stars, but they don't look up because they can't see it. As if you go back 10, 20, 30 years, wasn't that much light, you could look up, see the stars. So the idea of what would help is for us, is just in general, is to bring it to us more. And I think that's going to come, but you're right, television is not the easiest media, or cable is going to be the best medium. So my question is, what would be the best way to bring realia to a classroom? Here is a meteor. You know, here is how the Earth really works and moves.
Well, I'm a teacher, and I certainly think that part of what you can do is simply to help kids get a hands-on feel for science. I'm not so sure that the stars are particularly the place I'd start in 3rd grade, but understanding how the sky works, understanding how the world works. Oftentimes we tell kids that instead of letting them figure it out for themselves. So there's a great movement that many of you perhaps know about inquiry-based learning, where the kids begin to discover the power of science, the power of their own minds. And I think that's certainly something that we can do a great service to our kids by giving them that sense of power over the world rather than the fear that Dave talks about.
And to turn to Hollywood, I hope that Hollywood will make a really bad movie about everything that is people are afraid of, and then we can just all dismiss it by saying that's just a Hollywood bad movie.
John, do you want to say anything?
Well, you know, the only thing I did kind of want to respond to this gentleman, because I think he raises a valid point, and I think one of the reasons we have cosmophobia is because you're right. We're scared of the stuff on Earth we can't grapple with. So we extend that fear out into the universe. They're two separate things. The universe is doing fine. Here on Earth, we do have some problems. And I think it's important that we sort of make a distinction between those two very different concerns. I'm concerned about how we're managing our problems. I'm concerned about whether we're capable of managing our problems. And the thing that I keep coming back to is the fear that in our selfishness, we are simply not concerned enough with the common good. You know, and I think, you know, and again, I won't go off on this tangent, but what you're talking about, Senator Lugar's, for instance, efforts to try and wrap up fissile material, the funding was cut for that in 3 or 4 consecutive years. We simply don't want to pay taxes. That's one of the issues. We don't really want to pay the taxes necessary to manage an ever-growing population. So many of the things we're talking here today. Education, efforts to get people to understand what's going on in the world and what goes on in the cosmos. At a certain point, it comes down to all of us saying, you know, I'm going to dig into my pocket. I'm going to put money into the common pot. I mean, I'm not a believer that somehow all the problems in the world can be solved without putting my hand in my own pocket and put it into the common pot. That's my little political rant, but I think that's a lot of what the problem is.
And on that note, let me say that it's come time to conclude the panel and to conclude SETICon. Thank you all for being part of this great experiment in public education, for coming, and have a safe drive home.
And if we... I also want to thank you for coming, and I'm curious, how many of you will come to a SETICon next year?
Where is it? Here in Santa Clara?
Is there a house available?
We're going to think a lot about what the next step is. And all of you who have joined in by coming, we'll let you know. You'll be on our primary mailing list. So
I think it's been a big success, so we sure better do it again. Whether it'll literally be here in this hotel, I don't know.
Well, it used to be the ASP traveled from place to place, at Washington, D.C. one year.
Right. To quickly answer your question, we have not decided anything, I think, at the SETI Institute until we have a chance to recover from this, think about it, talk to the folks who have put it on. But as I say, we will talk about it. I think, like David, many of us on the board are very encouraged by your turnout, and we'll certainly let you know if there's going to be another one and where it will be and when it will be. We'll give you lots of notice. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.